Are we inches away from a battle unlike any the world has ever seen? Find out on this edition of Puzzle Pieces of Prophecy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Puzzle Pieces of Prophecy, where we explore God's prophetic word and examine current events under the microscope of Scripture. I'm your host, Les Simmons, and tonight we're going to be talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39, otherwise known as the Battle of Gog and Magog. The question before us today is, how close are we? Is this prophetic passage about to be fulfilled? So in order to understand chapters 38 and 39, we need to put them in the context of the book in which they were written. Obviously, chapter 38 and 39 come after chapter 37 and before chapter 40. What we find when we study all of these chapters is that there is a chronology laid out, and we're actually going to start a little bit earlier than that. We're going to start with chapter 36. But we'll see that there is a definite chronology that is laid out. Now, chapter 36 is a prophecy to the land. Ezekiel prophesies to the mountains, to the rivers, to the ravines, to the valleys, and to the cities. And he says, or God says through him rather, that they will not remain desolate. Now, as we look back through history, we can see that the land of Israel was a desolate waste for a long time. As a matter of fact, Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, he described the Holy Land, his visit to the Holy Land in the 1860s. And the words that he used to describe them were things like hopeless, dreary, unlovely, and cursed. But in chapter 36 of Ezekiel, God promises that the land would not remain that way, that the people of Israel would return from all the nations to which they were scattered, and that the land would be cultivated and fruitful again. Chapter 37 is another prophetic passage, and it is one of the most famous prophecies in the Bible. It's called the Valley of Dry Bones. And it is a prophecy not to the land, like chapter 36, but to the people themselves. And it is God himself who tells us what the prophecy means. He explains that the dry bones represent the whole house of Israel. And he explains also that there would be two stages to their return to the land. First, they would be regathered in the flesh. They would be brought physically back to the land from which they were scattered. Afterward, once they're established in the land, then he would put his spirit into them, and the relationship between God and Israel would be restored fully and permanently. Next comes chapter 38 and 39, which we'll be discussing tonight, and then chapter 40 begins a series of chapters, actually all the way to the end of the book, which all discuss the millennial kingdom. The millennial kingdom begins at the return of Christ at the end of the tribulation period and lasts for 1,000 years, thus the name millennial kingdom. So the chronology that Ezekiel lays out places the battle of Gog and Magog firmly between the regathering of Israel into the land and the beginning of the millennial kingdom. Now, it should be noted that there is a second battle, also referred to as Gog and Magog, at the end of the millennial kingdom. Once the millennial kingdom has ended, Satan is loosed after having been bound for 1,000 years, and there is a second battle there called Gog and Magog. It should not be confused with the battle from Ezekiel 38 and 39. They are two distinct and different battles. And many prophecy students confuse the two because they both say Gog and Magog. And we're going to talk about why that is in a little while. But They are not the same battle. Well, how do we know that they're not the same battle? Well, there's two different things. First, they have a different list of participants. Ezekiel 38 and 39 have an entire list of nations that come against the nation of Israel for the purpose of taking a spoil. The battle at the end of the millennial kingdom features participants from all over the earth. From all nations, from all tribes, from all tongues. They all flock to Satan's banner for one final rebellion against the King of Kings. And the other difference is they have different purposes. What is the purpose of Ezekiel 38 and 39? That battle is to turn the hearts of Israel back to their God. As God said he would do in Ezekiel 37, he said he would put his spirit in them and their hearts would be turned to him, restoring the relationship between them. The way that he accomplishes that, or at least begins to accomplish that, is through the battle of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Now, the purpose of the battle at the end of the millennial kingdom is to expose man's wickedness. It's to expose the hearts of those who have not turned toward God. Because even though Jesus Christ has physically reigned in Jerusalem, reigned over the earth for 1,000 years in our midst, at the end of that 1,000 years, there is a rebellion unlike any that has ever been seen. Satan is loosed, people flock to his banner, and God has to put down that final rebellion. It is the final exposure of man's wickedness and desire to rebel. So, two different battles. So let's start talking about Ezekiel chapter 38. We're going to pull up our scripture here. We're going to go to verse 8 first. Instead of verse 1, we'll start with verse 8. And there's a reason for this. Let's take a look. After many days you will be summoned. And here God is talking to Gog. After many days you will be summoned. In the latter years you will come into the land that is restored from the sword, whose inhabitants had been gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual waste. But its people were brought out from the nations, and they are living securely, all of them. So the reason we started with this verse is because it's important to demonstrate a couple of things. One is just the greatness of God. Ezekiel had this vision. He wrote this prophecy in the early 6th century BC. This is 650 years before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. It's more than 700 years before Israel was even scattered among the nations in 135 AD by the Romans. 1813 years after that scattering, on May 14th, 1948, in a single day, as prophesied by the prophet Isaiah, Israel was reborn. Which means, if you've done the math, that God gave Ezekiel a specific vision of events 2,500 years before they began to occur. Now, our own recent history shows us God's amazing fulfillment of his prophetic word. Ezekiel 36 said that the land would not be desolate, would no longer be desolate. It is no longer desolate. Israel produces a wide range of crops. It produces grain, cotton, vegetables, fruits. Its grapes alone have spawned an entire wine industry that exports on a global scale. Ezekiel 37 has been partially fulfilled. The house of Israel has been returned to the land. They are physically present in the land from which they were scattered, just as God said they would be. Now, this is the in the flesh regathering. The spirit is still eluding them. They are not regathered in the spirit yet, which is, again, the purpose of this battle that we're talking about tonight. Spiritual revival is one of the primary reasons for this battle to take place. Well, what does that mean for us? Well, it means this. For believers, it should be an immense source of encouragement as we personally witness the confirmation of our faith through the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. For unbelievers, it's an incredible opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to say, you know what? This book is accurate. This book is true. We can acknowledge the truth of Scripture and we can believe in its author in order that we might be saved from the horrific things that are about to come upon the whole world and from the judgment in eternity. After all, that's the purpose of prophecy. The Bible tells us in Revelation chapter 19 that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Prophecy exists to testify to Jesus. Jesus himself said, I've told you these things before they happen, so that when they happen, you might believe. We have only to look to our own recent history to see that Jesus is a God worth believing in. So, getting back to the verse, there's one other thing that we want to talk about. We'll scroll back up a little bit. After many days you will be summoned. In the latter years you will come into the land that is restored from the sword, whose inhabitants have been gathered from many nations. So let's just stop right there. In the latter years you will come into the land. That phrase, in the latter years, is a time indicator for our benefit. What it means is that if we can see this battle on the near horizon, if the conditions for this battle are taking shape around us, if the stage is being set and the actors are moving to their marks, we can know with a certainty that we are in the latter years, otherwise known as the end times. So let's start talking about who the players in this battle are. We'll start at the beginning now. Verse 1 and 2. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. So already we're going to get hit with some names here. We're going to spend some time on Gog first. Gog obviously is an important player in this piece. He's an individual. He's mentioned only in 3 places in most Bibles, and you'll find out why I say most in just a little bit here. But he's mentioned here in Ezekiel. He's mentioned again in Revelation chapter 20, and neither of those really give us much in the way of an identification other than to say that he is a leader of the nations involved. There is, like I said, a third reference. That reference is in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, and it is simply a son in the line of Reuben, but nothing else is said about him. So again, not much help. So how can we find out more about who this Gog is? Well, there is an unexpected source. And I have to give credit to the late Dr. Chuck Missler for this. I learned this from watching some of his teachings. So what we find out is that most Bibles today, as the source for their Hebrew Old Testament, use something called the Masoretic text. The problem with that is that the Masoretic text was not completed until the 10th century A.D. Why is that important? Well, it's important because this is not the text that Jesus and the apostles used when they were teaching. So what text did they use? Well, there was another text. This text is a Greek text, which was a translation of the Hebrew that existed in the time of Jesus and the apostles. It's called the Septuagint. This text was commissioned about 275 BC by Ptolemy II. It was translated by 72 Hebrew scribes, 6 from each of the 12 tribes. And the reason that it became so prevalent is because Greek was becoming, and did become even more so after that point, the dominant language of the region. What that meant is that the Hebrew Bible could be read now and understood by not only Jews who had all but lost their native tongue, but also by most of the known world. And it is a well-attested fact that the Septuagint was indeed the Bible of the early church, of the first century church, of the church fathers. It wasn't until several centuries later that the Latin Vulgate became the the primary church, primary Bible. So, in what ways are we different? Well, there's a couple, but the one that's important for our purposes is from the book of Amos. We're going to go there right now. Amos, verse 7. I'm sorry, chapter 7, verse 1. Let's take a look at this. Thus the Lord God showed me, and behold, he was forming a locust swarm when the spring crop began to sprout. And behold, the spring crop was after the king's mowing. It's not very helpful, other than to tell us that there is a locust swarm forming. But if we move over to the Septuagint version, we find a different reading. And it says this, Thus has the Lord God showed me, and behold a swarm of locusts coming from the east, and behold one caterpillar, King Gog. So there's our name Gog there again. Why is this important? I mean, here it says that Gog is a caterpillar. Well, the reason it's important is because in the book of Proverbs, it tells us that the locusts have no king. But these locusts here have a king called King Gog. Okay? How did this come about? Well, if you remember, Jesus said that not one jot or tittle would fall from the law until all things were fulfilled. And it turns out that the difference between the Masoretic text and the Hebrew text on which the Septuagint was based is one tittle. A tittle is like a little dot that slightly changes the meaning of words. But anyway, so we've got here locusts with a king. The book of Proverbs tells us that the locusts have no king. There is another set of locusts in Revelation chapter 9 that are also special. And these locusts appear at the at the blowing of the fifth trumpet. Okay, the bottomless pit is opened, and out of that bottomless pit comes a swarm of locusts. Now we're going to move on to chapter, and these are nasty locusts. If you read this description, they're nothing like normal locusts. Let's look at verse 11 here. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek he has the name Apollyon. Okay, so here is a second swarm of locusts that also have a king. This king is a supernatural being. He is a fallen angel, the angel of the abyss. He is king over these locusts. And these locusts, if you read the chapter, you'll find out they are supernatural creatures. They are not normal locusts. So we can assume that since normal locusts don't have a king, the locusts in Amos have a king, and these locusts in Revelation have a king, that both the locusts in Amos and the ones in Revelation are both supernatural. What does that mean for us? Well, the important thing is the king here, the king being a fallen angel. That's about as far as Dr. Misler got me. The question now is there any more evidence to support this idea of locusts with a king? And remember, one of these kings is named Gog. Is there any more evidence to support this whole idea that we're chasing here? Well, if we go to Daniel chapter 10, in Daniel chapter 10, Daniel has a vision of a conflict, and he immediately starts praying and mourning and fasting and seeking to understand this vision that he had. After a period of 21 days, an angel appears before him. Let's move on to verse number 12 and 13 and just take a look at that. This is the angel speaking to Daniel. Then he said to me, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this, and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Okay, so we see here we've got Daniel praying. An angel appears before him and says that he is held up by this prince of the kingdom of Persia. Well, if this guy is an angel, who but another angel would be able to withstand him? And not only that, but he needed reinforcements. Michael, the chief prince, came in. So just hold on to that phrase, prince and chief prince, because it ties back into the idea that Gog is a fallen angel. If we go back to our chapter in Ezekiel, chapter 38, we'll see that the same exact language is used. Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince, there's that word prince, of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. So Gog is a prince. Gog was the name of a fallen angel, king of the locusts. Gog is a prince, which is the same title that both the prince of the kingdom of Persia and Michael, the chief prince, have. So, and the other thing that's interesting about this is that some translations do not have the word Rosh here. What they have instead, for instance, here's the King James Version, they have the exact same title as Michael. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So, most of us would assume that just by reading this passage that Rosh, or that Gog, is just an ordinary human leader. But the scriptural evidence suggests that he is a supernatural being, probably a fallen angel. Well, that causes a bit of a problem for us if that's true. In the next chapter, in Ezekiel 39, Gog dies. That does not seem possible for an angelic being who's going to make another appearance at the end of the millennium. So how do we resolve that? Well, the answer is that this is a dual fulfillment. There is an earthly leader who leads the battle, and then there is a spiritual being who influences him. So, if we're going to say that, we need to find out, is there a scriptural precedent for that sort of thing? Absolutely. It turns out that there's a number of them. The very first one that I can think of happens in the book of Genesis after Adam and Eve ate the fruit. You see, God here has a conversation, and during that conversation, he speaks both to the serpent and to Satan. And as it happens, Ezekiel himself uses the same technique in chapter 28, when he's speaking both to the earthly king of Tyre and also to Satan. So the Bible absolutely has points where a dual fulfillment is taking place, where there is both an earthly component and then there is a spiritual component. And I believe that is the case that's happening here. So let's move on now that we have a better understanding of who Gog is. We're going to start talking about the nations that are involved. Now, in this second verse, we've got Gog, we've got Magog, we've got the... I'm going to move back to the NASB here. Magog, Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Now, there's a few others that'll be joining us later, but let's start with these. These names are going to be unfamiliar to us unless we've been reading the book of Genesis. And the reason I say that is because in Genesis chapter 10, there's a passage that's known as the Table of Nations. This is a list of nations that begin to form after the flood of Noah. This table discusses the repopulation and distribution of people throughout the earth from the sons of Noah. So let's take a look at a map here, because that'll be fun. All right, this map is from 1854, and the reason that we're looking at this map from 1854 is because there are a number of people who, when we start identifying these nations and putting modern modern names to them. There are people who say that these modern identifications are only recently contrived, and that it wasn't always believed that that's the nations that they were. This map is by no means recent. It's from 1854, like I said, and it was compiled using information from the 1st century AD, from Josephus, and even from rabbinical sources that are even earlier than that. Okay, so on this map, you'll see we've got some these blue shaded areas are all water. I shaded them blue a little bit. And I also want to point out that this green area close to the center, that green area is the nation of Israel. So let's start looking at some of our names. We'll start with Magog, and I'm going to start highlighting portions of this map so you can see where these are more clearly. So Magog is right up here. Magog is right up here. Okay. Magog was a son of Japheth. He came to be known as the Scythians, and you can see that the Scythians is a group that goes right across here like this, settling on both sides of the Caspian Sea here. Okay. Scythians eventually are one and the same as Magog. He's a son of Japheth, came to be known as the Scythians, and according to Josephus and others, they settled north of the Caucasus Mountains, which is this mountain range right here. Okay. And like I said, they possibly extended to the east side of the Caspian Sea. Even if, though, that can't be proven to be true, there is another nation that we're going to discuss later that did, in fact, populate this same area. So it will be covered and will be part of this the Gog and Magog invasion. So let's move on next. Next we have Rosh. Rosh is right here up at the top. Okay. Now, like I said, well, first of all, Rosh was a tribe within Magog, and therefore also descended from Japheth. But as I previously mentioned, the word Rosh in some versions of our Bible is not translated as a nation. It's translated as being chief prince. Okay? So, even if I don't highlight this Rosh here, we'll find out it's a moot point, because between Magog and another one of our nations, this area is still covered. So definitely going to be taking place in the battle. All right, so next we'll move on to Meshech and Tubal. Now Meshech and Tubal are down here below the Caucasus Mountains. This is Tubal and Meshech right in here. Okay. They're below the Caucasus Mountains there. And there are two different theories about where they went. So for now, we're just going to highlight where they are on this map, but we're going to discuss both of those theories. Okay, so that's the ones that are covered in this first in verse number 2. Now we're going to move on down to verse number 5, and we have a few more people a few more nations that are joining. The first one is Persia. Persia is also from the line of Japheth, and we are going to highlight two different spots here. And the reason that we're going to do that is because Persia, like I said, is from the line of Japheth. He came out of his son Madai, who later became known as the Medes, and together they formed two halves of the Medo-Persian Empire. So that's why we've got two lines here, because as history went on, the Medo-Persian Empire succeeds the Babylonian Empire, and that happens during the time of Daniel. Persia proves to be the stronger of the two, and the Medes kind of fade into the background of history. So this is one of the most well-known nations that we'll be discussing today. It had the name of Persia up until about 90 years ago before, and then after that its name was changed. Okay, so after Persia we have Ethiopia. Now if we look at this map, Ethiopia is right down here at the bottom. Okay, now it's important to note that the biblical Ethiopia is a little bit different from modern Ethiopia. This is closer to modern Ethiopia. Um, Biblical Ethiopia extended a little bit further north and a little bit further to the west. And then right above Ethiopia, you'll see the name Cush here. We're going to highlight that too. And the reason that we're going to do that is from a biblical standpoint, Cush and Ethiopia are synonymous. They're the same. Cush was a son of Ham. So this is the first nation that we're going to be dealing with that was not a son of Japheth. Okay, but for our purposes, Cush and Ethiopia are the same. Next, we've got Put. Persia, Ethiopia, and Put. Put is way over here on the west side of the map. Okay, got it highlighted there. Put was also a son of Ham. He spread further abroad from to the west than any of his brothers, according to Genesis chapter 10, and he was west of Egypt. Now, Egypt is an area that we're not going to highlight, but I'm just going to throw a kind of a little dotted line. Egypt is right about there. Okay, between this dotted line and the sea. Okay, so after Put, we've got Gomer in verse 6. Gomer with all his troops, Beth Togarmah. So Gomer is in two different places. Gomer is right here below the Black Sea and also above the Black Sea. So along with Magog, Gomer is the other nation that between the two they cover the area that is called Rosh. Okay? And like I said, he's also down here below the Black Sea. Gomer, we're back to sons of Japheth now. Gomer was a son of Japheth, settled in the coastlands both north and south of the Black Sea. And finally, we've got Beth Togarmah, which means house of Togarmah. Okay. Togarmah was a son of Gomer, therefore he was a grandson of Japheth. So, now that we've got all of that decided, we need to make some modern identification so we can talk about who these nations are today. So the first thing I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier is I'm going to highlight the areas that these names, because obviously the yellow highlighter I've got here does not cover the extent of their territory. So let's do that. So now we can see that there is this darker shaded area. This is all the area covered or controlled by the nations that we just highlighted. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is you'll notice that there's some areas that are not highlighted. Just for the purpose of contrast, I'm going to make them white. Okay, there's one up here in the northwest corner that I haven't done. We can talk about that in a little bit, but for now this is white, just to make it easier to see. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to add some borders, some modern borders in here, so we can start talking about who these countries are today. All right, so back to Magog. Magog settled on the southern steppes of... Oh, let me get my pen here ready to go. Sorry. Of... Pen is not big enough. We're going to go a little bit bigger. This is Russia, okay, and not only Russia. This area in here also covers Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Okay, that's all in this area right here. Okay, southern steppes of Russia, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Like I said, Magog probably extended east of the Caspian Sea. This is where all of our stand nations are, like our Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. That's all in this area right here. Okay. All right. Next, we've got Rosh. Rosh is extends into central Russia. There are some areas that are controlled by these nations that are beyond the areas of the map. You got like this portion of Russia here. You've got further to the east with the stands and into Persia. In the south, you've got there's some area down in the south that's not shown, and there's some area to the west. The problem with making it bigger so that you see more land is that then you lose sight of Israel. Israel becomes so tiny, and yet all of these nations are going to come against it. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Meshach and Tubal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are two theories regarding Meshach and Tubal. Theory one is that they are right here in northeastern Turkey. This is Turkey right here. All right, Meshach and Tubal here in northeastern Turkey. Now, if that's not true, that area is still covered between Gomer, between Togarmah, and between Magog. This area is still covered. Now, theory two is that Meshach is in the area surrounding Moscow in western Russia. So, like Madai became the Medes, Meshach eventually became the Muscovites and then founded the city of Moscow. Tubal, on the other hand, moved north and east into central Russia and into the Siberian Peninsula, which covers the eastern portion. And they founded the city of Tobolsk at the northern terminus of the Tobol River, both of which are named after Tubal. Okay, so that's theory number two. So we either have them sitting here at the northern portion of Turkey or up here above where we can see in the map in central Russia. So most people view those as being competing theories, but that's not necessarily true. Both of these things can be true at the same time. It's entirely possible that Meshach and Tubal, right here and here, settled first in Turkey, and then a portion of them migrated up into the Russian area and founded Moscow and Tobolsk on the Tubal River. Okay? So they're not really competing theories, they're actually complementary theories. And what they do is they serve to highlight the deep ancestral connections between these nations, between Meshach, Tubal, Rosh, and Magog, which strengthens the likelihood of the end-time alliance that is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So not competing, absolutely can be complementary. All right, so back to Persia. Persia was still called that until 1935. After 1935, Persia became known as Iran. Okay? Iran, bear with me one moment. All right, so we've got Iran over here. All right, next we had Ethiopia. Ethiopia, like I said, had different borders then than it does today. This is Ethiopia right here. Sorry, excuse me one moment. This is Ethiopia down here. And as I said, it extended further into the north and the west. And so what we've got here is an Ethiopia that also covers at least part of Sudan and the South Sudan. Okay? All right, next we have Put. Put, as I said, is west of Egypt. This is Egypt right here. I'm going to throw that in here, Egypt. Put is the nation of Libya. So it should be noted that both Russia and Turkey are collaborating in Libya right now to keep peace between two warring factions. So then we've got Gomer. Gomer, as I said, was both south and north of the Black Sea. That makes the southern portion of Gomer a part of Turkey, which no surprise there. However, the northern part is interesting, and you'll find out as soon as I write this name. This, Ukraine. As we all know, Russia and Ukraine are currently involved in an ongoing war, and that war is significant in as far as how it relates to Ezekiel 38 and 39. The resolution for that battle will come on God's timetable. I believe that these two nations will come into some sort of alignment or agreement, or one will simply assert dominance over the other. And it is also, there is a third possibility, and that is that only the portion of Gomer south of the Black Sea will take part in this battle. But I don't see that as being the case, but it's entirely possible. So I don't know for sure. Finally, Beth Togarmah. Beth Togarmah was right here, rounding out that area of Turkey. So we've got some other nations here that are not named. I'm just going to fill in a couple of names for us so that we can see who are these people who are not taking part. Syria is right here. This little guy right here, and you can't even see my writing. This is Lebanon. This area that I'm filling in right here is Lebanon. Okay. Next we've got Iraq. This is Iraq. And this is Jordan. And this big area here is called Saudi Arabia. Down here we've got Yemen. And this over here is Oman. All right, so we've got this area over here. This is where we get in. This is part of Europe. Okay, so we're getting into Italy. We're getting into Spain. That's what's going on over here. We'll talk about them when we start talking about the merchants of Tarshish. All right, so now that we've got these figured out, we know who these players are. All these shaded areas, Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Libya, Sudan, Ethiopia, all of these are people who are going to come against Israel at the time of this attack. Okay, so what does this mean for us? Well, it means that we can ask a couple more questions. First, why aren't these guys in the white attacking? And second, what are the conditions for this battle to take place? So let's start with that. Let's look at the conditions for the Battle of Gog and Magog. Condition 1, the attacking nations must have cooperation with each other. So this doesn't mean that the nations are necessarily friendly toward one another. What it does mean is that they have some sort of diplomatic relations and that they have a common enemy or goal, in this case Israel, in order to take a spoil. That's all the motivation that they need. However, if this battle is on the near horizon, we should already be able to see some evidence of, first, an adversarial position toward Israel, and second, a deepening of ties between these nations. So let's begin with the position on Israel. Let's start looking at some headlines here, shall we? All right. So just as this one from the Harbinger's Daily says, just as the Bible prophesied, Russia has chosen its side. Okay? The claim is made that Russia has chosen a side in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. And I give you pretty good odds that it's not Israel. Here's another article that says why Russia and Hamas are growing closer. So it's a matter of public record that Vladimir Putin failed to directly condemn the October 7th massacre conducted by Hamas. And he only expressed grave concerns. So this is pretty shocking, especially considering there is the confirmed loss of 26 Russian lives. Moscow has also declined to place Hamas on their official list of terrorist organizations and instead blames the U.S. and Israel for failed diplomatic policies. So if that's their opinion, I would definitely say, yeah, Russia has chosen a side. Furthermore, Russia openly supports the creation of a Palestinian state, dividing the land of Israel and its capital, Jerusalem, both of which are no-nos according to God's word. Okay, so that's Russia. What do we got next? Well, we've got Turkey. Turkey's Erdogan threatens to invade Israel over war in Gaza as regional tensions grow. So we see that Turkey has, they flat out demonstrated and pronounced their hostility to Israel for a while now. They toe the line in order to try and appease the West to some degree, but that dynamic is shifting greatly. And he's here said that he's willing to go into Israel, to invade Israel in order to prevent the destruction of Hamas. Okay, so next we've got Libya has no plans to make peace with Israel, Eastern Libyan minister says. So here we are, Jerusalem Post. Libya has flat out said, we will not make peace with Israel. So again, we see the position towards Israel from the nations that we've talked about are openly hostile. They are not friends of Israel in any way. In fact, Libya has a law on the books that prevents any sort of political meeting with Israel. So, despite that, a meeting actually took place. And so, when that took place, there were protests, and you see protests erupt in Libya over contact with Israel. The Libyan foreign minister who took part in this unofficial meeting was accused of grand treason and immediately suspended pending an investigation. So, Libya, same as the others we've discussed so far, definitely has an adversarial position toward Israel. Now, Sudan actually has normalized relations with Israel. However, that relationship has been recently jeopardized over these concerns right here. That after the October 7th attack by Hamas, Sudan began a process of resuming their relations with Iran. So we have, Israel has normalized relations with Sudan, but, excuse me, but after this horrific attack, they've decided they want to be chummy with Iran. I would call that an adversarial position toward Israel. All right, moving on. We've lost. Iran, we know that Iran launched this, this is a few months ago now. They launched their retaliatory attack on Israel with hundreds of drones of missiles. There's no surprise that Iran has an adversarial position. It's almost not worth mentioning because it's so blatant. So, how about their relationships with each other? Remember, our condition is the attacking nations must have cooperation with each other. Well, war in the Middle East is boosting Russia-Turkey ties. I don't know what else to say, but obviously Turkey and Russia are cooperating with each other in Libya, like we already discussed. They're also working together in Syria, Moving along, there was another article that was producing a ton of pop-ups, so I got rid of it, but Putin was happy to discuss the progress the two countries have made recently in their relationship. So here's something I want to show you guys before we continue here. This picture behind me, sorry, one moment. This picture behind me is actually the Golan Heights. This is a portion of Israel. It's where most prophecy experts expect that this battle of Gog and Magog is going to take place. The area borders both Lebanon and Syria, either of which would be, amazing launching points for the battle. And as we know, Israel and Hezbollah, they're currently engaged in a very, very, very volatile conflict that could erupt into full-scale war at any moment. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but when we talk about nations that are not participating. But just because a nation is not participating according to the chapter does not mean that they can't be used as a staging ground. So anyway, this is the Golan Heights. This is where the battle is believed to take place. Here's the mountains of Israel that are, right there as well. Okay, so here we see, going back to our news articles, Turkey and Iran agreed to establish high-level cooperation council. Okay, so we've already seen Russia and Turkey are together. Now here's Turkey and Iran. As we would expect, their cooperation level is high as well. Iran is also currently working in Syria alongside Russian and Turkish forces. Additionally, Iran funds Hezbollah and in Lebanon, and the attacks from there have been coming pretty much daily since the 8th of October of last year. So I'm sure no one is surprised. Even the Pentagon figured it out. The keen minds at the Pentagon have figured out that there is deepening cooperation and relationship between Russia and Iran. Well, there we go. These guys are on top of things, I'll tell you. It's also a well-known fact that Iran is providing Russia with drone technology for their war in Ukraine. Russia has also been a major patron of Iran's nuclear program, and it uses its UN veto power in order to curtail sanctions that the West tries to impose. So very, very, very chummy there. You definitely have cooperation between Russia and Iran. Okay, so these three nations. Those three nations are well enough established that the Center the CSIS has determined that it's a nexus of relations. So there we go. Despite all of this, our liberal media in our country believes we should be looking to Turkey as a balancing actor in the region. My feeling is that they need to spend more time in their Bibles, then they would know that that is a very poor choice and will not benefit either us or Israel in any way. But that's the media in our country. All right, so what about some of the other nations that we talked about? How are they doing with these guys? Well, Sudan is to solidify military and economic ties with Russia, including a base on the Red Sea. So, Sudan and Russia getting along quite well. Ethiopia and Iran to further scale up bilateral ties. This is... it's pretty clear. We've got a few... we'll look at one more, but for this particular topic. But it's pretty clear that the nations that we've talked about are all in agreement. They all have animosity toward Israel, and they all are working in cooperation. Here we see the new Iranian ambassador presents credentials to the Libyan Presidential Council. They're expanding their bilateral relations, and they describe them as both strong and comprehensive. I could keep going on with this for forever. And it could be very well and easily demonstrated that our condition number one is well fulfilled. So condition one, attacking nations must have cooperation with each other. I'd call that a slam dunk. Number two, Russia must be in a position to act as a guard for other nations. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at a few more headlines. Greece and Turkey are adamant about retaining their Russian missiles. Oh, you can't see it, so here, let me show it to you. Greece and Turkey are adamant about retaining their Russian missiles. Both Greece and Turkey have S-400 missile systems. There's a missile launcher right there. That is a Russian-built device. So, let's take a look at another one. A large number of Russian troops and weapons arrive in Libya. Russia is definitely acting as a guard, as would be expected if the Bible were true, which it is. So, as we can see, the Bible clearly said 2,500 years ago that these things were going to take place. All right, let's get rid of this ad here. Alarm in UK and US over possible Iran-Russia nuclear deal. So the concern is that Russia is giving Iran nuclear secrets. Sounds to me like Russia is acting as a guard for its allies, just as the Bible predicted it would. And finally, Ethiopia unveils a new Russian-made electronic warfare system. So, I mean, it should be pretty well established that condition 2 is easily satisfied based on the articles that we've seen here today. Russia is indeed acting as a guard for the other nations that are involved, and the attacking nations definitely have cooperation with each other. Here's another easy one to fulfill. Number 3, Israel must be in the land. Israel is in the land, has been in the land since we talked about May 14th, 1948, and they continue to be there until this day. This is the single most profound fulfillment of Bible prophecy since the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. There's no way to get around the fact that the Bible is accurate in the things it says that are going to happen, and the things that are yet to happen definitely will. Okay, condition 3 is satisfied. So now let's take a look at condition number 4. Israel must be in a perceived state of security. All right, here we have our first unsatisfied condition, and I think we can all agree that Israel does not perceive itself to be in a state of security at all at this time, being attacked on multiple fronts from, the IRCG in Syria, from Hezbollah in Lebanon, from Hamas in the Gaza Strip, from the Houthis in Yemen. Iran, as we talked about, launched a massive missile and drone attack. Israel does not perceive itself to be in a state of security. However, even though this is unsatisfied, this may be the most relevant condition for our present time. Beginning in October 7th of last year, that war has been going on with Hamas and the Gaza Strip as a result of the horrific terrorist attack that Hamas committed at a music festival. And this has expanded into a multi-front conflict. So let's talk again about the unshaded nations that we talked about, or that we mentioned earlier. Okay. Many of these guys, though not all, are represented in the current conflict. Like we said, Syria, there are attacks coming in from Iraq, there are attacks coming in from Yemen, now, Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia are a little different. Egypt has a peace treaty with Israel. Jordan has a peace treaty with Israel. Saudi Arabia is believed to be the next nation to sign the Abraham Accords. So these nations that have diplomatic relationships with Israel may not be willing to defend Israel at the time of this massive attack, but they also may honor their treaty by not attacking themselves. And that explains why they are unshaded. So what about Syria, Iraq, Yemen, all of these? Well, the current conflict, well, let's say it this way. This takes us basically to Psalm 83. Okay? Many believe that Psalm 83 describes a war in which many of Israel's immediate neighbors, like the ones that we've discussed so far, will be utterly defeated by God's sovereign might. Others believe that Psalm 83 was already fulfilled when Israel became a nation, and was immediately attacked on all sides. Miraculously, Israel survived that massive onslaught, but it remains a nation to this day. However, I cannot buy into that interpretation for one simple reason. The nations named in Psalm 83 are still at it. Psalm 83, and let's pull it up just for fun. Psalm 83. We'll pull this up here. Psalm 83. Now it begins with a declaration of motive by the offending nations, which is namely to wipe out the name of Israel from being a nation forever. And if you pay attention to what these nations are saying who are attacking Israel now, that's what they're saying. They want the complete destruction, annihilation of Israel. They are trying to wipe out of the name of Israel forever. So there's that. Now, the problem is that when we reach the end, say verses 16 to 18, let's just read that real quick. Fill their faces with dishonor, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and dismayed forever, and let them be humiliated and perish, that they may know that thou alone, whose name is the Lord, art the most high over all the earth. Okay, so if Psalm 83 is a war, as some suggest, then the nations involved are dishonored, forever ashamed, forever dismayed, humiliated, and seeking the name of the Lord. If Psalm 83 were fulfilled 80 years ago, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in today. Those are incompatible ideas. So I believe that if Psalm 83 is a war, then has not yet been fulfilled. Although the current conflict, well, I'll continue in a second. Finally, there's a third group. There's a third group that believes that Psalm 83 is not a war at all, but is instead what's called an imprecatory prayer, which is basically a prayer that God would intervene and destroy Israel's enemies. Now, I tend to fall into this third category because the language of the passage, if you read it, it does not seem to describe a battle at all. It merely exposes the hearts and desires of Israel's enemies and asks for God to deal with them. However, just because it isn't necessarily a war or a battle, that does not mean it can't or won't be fulfilled. It's quite possible that God is using the current conflict in order to bring about the fulfillment of Psalm 83, and that the result will be an Israel who meets our condition 4, which, as a reminder, is a perceived state of security. Now, let's say that that's the case. Don't be fooled into thinking that this could take months or years to be accomplished. History is replete with examples of our status changing in a single day. Here in the U.S., 9/11 is a great example. The world was different for us after that day. For Israel, October 7th made a huge impact. Israel was not the same from one day to the next. I'm sure we all remember the massive difference between the day before COVID lockdowns and the day after. Life can change in an instant and without warning, which is why it is imperative that you understand the lateness of the hour, the rapidly changing conditions, and then you make sure that you have believed and are secure in the salvation that only comes through Jesus Christ. All right, so let's look at our fifth and final condition, sort of. The uninvolved nations must be either unable or unwilling to help. Okay, so our unshaded areas, like I said, some of them have peace treaties, such as Egypt or Jordan. Some nations are members of the Abraham Accords, for instance, UAE, Bahrain, and in the works is Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is interesting because they get mentioned later in our Ezekiel chapters. Sorry, let's go back to that. All right. right, Ezekiel 38. We'll just scroll down real quickly. In Ezekiel 38, verse 13, there are some people who make at least a token protest against the invasion. Here we see Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all its villages will say to you, have you come to capture spoil? Have you assembled your company to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, and to capture great spoil? Okay, so who are Sheba and Dedan? Well, Sheba and Dedan, as it turns out, are part of Saudi Arabia. Real quick, we'll go here again. Sheba and Dedan are right here in this area, and Saudi Arabia encompasses that area, and they worked into this area as well. So it is highly likely that Saudi Arabia is going to sign the Abraham Accords and will be in a state of peace with Israel at the time that this attack takes place. So there we've got Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, all covered, which is most of the immediate neighbors. Now, Lebanon with Hezbollah is possibly being dealt with right now during that war. As a matter of fact, as of yesterday, the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, has died. He's been killed in the conflict. So, what that's going to look like in the near future, I have absolutely no idea. But it's entirely likely that Lebanon will be put into a position where they are no longer willing or able to attack during the time of this. What about Syria? Well, Syria has been in a state of civil war for quite some time, which is why, part of the reason why that Russia, Turkey, and Iran are all in Syria already. They are working cooperatively. Syria has basically become a puppet nation that allows Iran to do whatever it wants. And so that may be why Syria is not attacking. Iraq, like I said, there are portions of Iraq right now that are being used as a launching point for Iranian proxies who are fighting against Israel as we speak. It may be that Iraq is taken out during that time. And there's a lot more that we can talk about. I've already gone long. But for now, just suffice to say that these nations will not be part of the attack. There is one more I want to talk about, and that's the merchants of Tarshish, which is somewhere in Europe. Now, a lot of people believe that Tarshish was Spain. However, there's some historical evidence that its main export during biblical times was tin. Tin happens to be the root of the name Britain. So there are many people who also believe that Tarshish was basically Great Britain or England. Why is that important? Well, the merchants of Tarshish with all their villages will say to you. Now, some translations, such as the King James, instead of villages, they say the young lions. Others, like the NSB, say villages. The question is, could it be colonies? Okay? In which case, it may be a veiled reference to the United States. For whatever reason, we are not defending Israel in this war. Which is not the normal posture, although with our current leadership and the potential future leadership, it looks like that may be changing, because neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris are particularly interested in a strong and independent Israel, nor are they interested in defending an Israel, a whole Israel. With that being said, let me just lay this right out right now. We'll talk about this in a future study, but a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for the destruction of America. If based on no other reason that God said, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, if we do not stand with Israel, we are headed for a destruction that will be unbelievable. And sadly, that's where we are ultimately headed. You know, the Bible tells us that all nations of the world will be burdened by the Israel problem. We've declared openly that we're seeking a two-state solution for Israel as opposed to defending their right to live on their land. We have made token efforts to defend Israel, but we're not a true friend. And the result of that is that we will be cursed and destroyed. As a matter of fact, it's quite obvious that we're under judgment already, but we'll talk about that at another time. So, this condition is mostly satisfied. Let's get back to our conditions here. This is condition 5. Uninvolved nations must be either unable or unwilling to help. There's a lot more I could say about the America thing and, what that means for us, but we'll have to save it for another time because, as I said, this condition is mostly fulfilled. Is there a 6th hidden condition? We want to talk about that real quick before we continue. Let's move over to Ezekiel 39, verses 7 and 8. Okay, remember I said that in the end result was that the hearts of Israel would be turned toward the Lord. Ezekiel 39, verse 7, And my holy name I shall make known in the midst of my people Israel. And I shall not let my holy name be profaned any more. And the nations will know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Behold, it is coming, and it shall be done, declares the Lord God. That is the day of which I have spoken. Ezekiel 37 said that Israel would turn back to God, not just in the flesh. They wouldn't just be brought into the land of the flesh, but they would also convert spiritually, once more being God's people, or serving the Lord the way that they should. This war begins the process of God's revival in the Spirit that Ezekiel 37 discussed. But there's an obstacle currently to that happening. And that obstacle is this. In Romans chapter 11, verse 25, it says this. This is Paul talking. For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, lest you be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Let's look at it in King James, just to see, because NASB says partial hardening. Most people are familiar with this one. I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits. That blindness, in part, has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. So, both versions, regardless of which one you read, say that Israel is not able to turn spiritually to the Lord until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Well, when does the fullness of the Gentiles come in? The answer to that is at the rapture of the church. Since national Israel cannot turn back to God until after the rapture, and since the primary purpose and outcome of the Gog-Magog battle is to turn the hearts of Israel back to God, then the Gog-Magog invasion cannot take place until the church has been raptured. Which means, if 4 out of our original 5 conditions are already fulfilled, sorry, excuse me one moment. If 4 out of our 5 conditions are already fulfilled, Israel being in this perceived state of security, obviously not being the one, and that one is currently being fulfilled, or could be fulfilled in the near future, then the rapture, our hidden 6th condition, could happen in the very, very near future. We are on the doorstep of that. So the last thing I want to do before I close this out for the day is this. I want to we're going to make a timeline so that we can see this more clearly. So we'll just draw a line here. To make sure we're working properly. Alright, we'll put a line here. We'll stop it right next to my ear here. Alright, so right here, and we'll call this around 32 AD was the crucifixion. Wow, that's terrible. Let's try that again. 32 AD. Okay. Around 32 AD was the crucifixion. Okay. In 70 AD, we have the destruction of the temple. In 135 AD, we have the dispersion of Israel among the nations. Now, there's an actual word for that. It's called the diaspora, but we'll call it the dispersion of Israel among the nations. Okay, this will not be to scale. We'll just throw this right about here. This is May 14th, 1948. This was Israel reborn. Again, in a single day, May 14th, 1948, just like Isaiah said it would be. All right, so that's happened. Let's go ahead and put this here. This is a very special today. This is today, the day that I'm doing this. This is September 28th, 2024. Today. Okay, so what happens next? Well, the next event is going to be the rapture. Do I know when that's going to be? Of course not. But it's in the very near future, I will tell you that. All right, after the rapture, as we've just discussed, becomes the Magog war. All right, now in the Magog war, Israel turns to God, and I believe that is what gives us our 144,000 witnesses, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, that is described during as being active during the tribulation period. Okay? 144,000 converted. And after that, after the Gog-Magog war, what I believe happens next is, as a result of that, comes the man of sin, who comes bearing a treaty. Okay, Gog and Magog is a major war. All of those nations that were in the shaded areas that we talked about are wiped out. As a matter of fact, God said He only leaves the 6th part of them left. As a result of that, I believe the Antichrist comes forward to either make, enforce, or strengthen a covenant for 7 years. This is synonymous with the beginning of the tribulation. Okay? So there is another theory that this treaty happens first, which is what gives Israel that false sense of security, and that the result of that security will be the Gog-Magog war. So condition 4 gets satisfied after the man of sin signs enforces the covenant. Man of sin, I mean the Antichrist. That brings the Gog-Magog war over here on this side of the Antichrist. Okay, for believers, it makes no. The rapture has to happen before either one of these, so it doesn't matter which one's first. The rapture has already happened. Okay, so 3.5 years after this, we've got the Great Tribulation begins. The significant thing about that is that beast worship is mandated, and that it must be signified by the taking of the mark of the beast. The Antichrist double crosses Israel, and the Jews flee into, presumably, to Petra in Jordan. Another 3.5 years after that is Armageddon. At Armageddon, we come back down with Jesus. That's right there. Okay, we come back down with Jesus, and the tribulation is ended. Martyred tribulation saints are resurrected. The millennial kingdom begins, and that lasts for 1,000 years. So we'll just call this section here the 1,000 years, millennial reign. After that 1,000, during this time, Satan is bound. Jesus is ruling in person from Jerusalem. And Satan bound it for the 1,000 years. And right here, after Armageddon, the conversion of national Israel is complete, and that relationship that we talked about is permanently restored between Israel and God, and they rule and reign also, or they have a very, very significant role during the millennial kingdom. As a matter of fact, the Bible describes a period where a Jew will be walking down the street, and 10 people will come along and grab a hold of his robe, so that they can just be near him, because he knows God and loves God, which is amazing, really. So after this 1,000 years, I'm going to move my head a little bit so we can see this. At the end of this 1,000 years, Satan is loosed. The final battle of human history takes place. Again, this is that second battle in the spirit of Gog and Magog. The resurrection of the dead takes place. That's not those who were part of the first resurrection. After which comes what's called the Great White Throne Judgment. Death and hell are destroyed. The heaven and the earth are burned up, and a new heaven and new earth are created, and eternity begins. So that wraps up this edition of Puzzle Pieces of Prophecy. I hope you can see that Bible prophecy has been and is currently being fulfilled right before our eyes. I encourage you to take what's already happened and what is happening now to be a guarantee that the rest of Scripture will be fulfilled with 100% accuracy. If you're concerned about the direction our world is headed, please understand that no man or government agency is able to sort this out for us. Only the Bible has the answers we're looking for, and only salvation through Jesus Christ can give you a heart, mind, and spirit capable of understanding His Word. If you don't know Jesus, I implore you to cry out to Him today. If you sincerely and diligently seek Him, He will answer. If you need more help or have questions, please reach out to me at mysterianministries@gmail.com. That's MYSTERIONMINISTRIES@gmail.com. For those of you who already know Jesus, He has called each of us to share the gospel with the whole world. One of the easiest and most painless ways that you can fulfill that great commission is by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. The more people who like and subscribe, the more people that YouTube's algorithm will put this video in front of, thereby reaching more people with the only hope of salvation, Jesus Christ. If you'd like to see more of my videos like this one, don't only like and subscribe, but also click on the notification icon. Turn on all notifications. Until next time, I'm Les Simmons, and this is Puzzle Pieces of Prophecy. Take care, and God bless.